Hi everyone, welcome to this third episode of Vanguardia Voices. I'm here with Angie Granada. Welcome, Angie.
Thank you very much.
Nice to have you here. And well, let me introduce you to Angie. She's a 20-year-old student of the 9th cohort of Honores Vanguardia. She is studying pedagogy of history and social sciences, passionate of history in different representations, and also drawing. She told me giraffes. So welcome, Angie. I really appreciate of having you here in this space. And let's talk about some interesting history facts and historic things, maybe some issues that the historic a signature or the historic knowledge must know. And we're gonna have this conversation about all of history and social studies today. So let's start asking you, Angie, who is Angie Granada? Introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation. First of all, as you said, I study history. I'm real passionate about my subject, but most of the time I just like to spend reading history. I just like to watch historical films, and that's me, just a person that's passionate for history. I love what I study, and yeah, I also love drawing, as you said. I love drawing animals in my free time, but yeah, that's it. Just me loving what I do.
Okay, nice to have you with us, Angie, because it's an us, me and the public. Also, thanks to Radio Universitaria team who support us with all the space and the cameras. Yeah, thanks to Beroch especially. Let's move on this theme, and I'm gonna ask you about your thesis project. We were talking a little bit before we start, and you told me something about diverse ways to learn about history. So what can you tell us about that in your thesis project?
Okay, first of all, I started loving history because I started reading historical novels. So I feel really passionate about it. So for my thesis, I'm working on how to use graphical novels to teach history. It's not a new thing. It's really common, but not in Latin America. So I made a historical graphic novel by myself. It's handmade by me, and it's going to be used for teaching the liberal revolution here in Ecuador based on what Eloy Alfaro did. So it's really funny because I love animals. So the historical novel, it's drawn by telling the story of a llama and a guinea pig.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So for me, it's really interesting because it's funny, it's easy to read, and also the facts are told by themselves. I mean, you don't have difficult words, you don't have too much dates, so it's really easy to get involved in the story if you have a character to identify yourself with, to empathize with, so you can be telling a story of a real person or a fictional character who's involved in a real historical scenario, so you can find yourself comfortable in historical media. So you can be focused in the environment and the facts and not just trying to memorize some things and dates.
Okay, so graphic novel, it's an interesting tool. You can maybe imagine it like maybe a comic.
Yeah, that's it. Like a comic.
Like a comic. And your passion of drawing, is there a relationship between those two things? Like maybe did you draw some of the historic things that you just told us, like from this guinea pig, and what else did you?
A llama.
And a llama.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you draw those?
Yeah, I did them by myself, and I started thinking about that because I read a graphical historical novel called Mouse. It's about the Holocaust, and I finished it in one day, and it's really entertaining. It's really easy to read, so I said, I can do something related to that, but related with history of my country. So as I like drawing, but I can't draw persons. I can draw people, but I can draw animals. I decided to do it that way. So it's really funny. It's really entertaining, but it's not planned it to be for kids. It's for adults, for young people who are interested in reading in a very entertaining way, and also learning by having fun yourself.
Well, the biggest part of comic readers, I think it's most old people, you know, not only young people. So different ways to understand and to learn about history.
Yes.
I'm gonna tell you something. The semiotic value of drawing maybe, I don't know, Eloy Alfaro as a llama or as a guinea pig maybe can have a conflict there of the representation of that person, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a little recommendation that you should choose the animal or the representation maybe based on personality, or maybe with those things to interconnect, not just a random animal.
Yeah.
Maybe I think some chiropolitic represented by a rat or a pig. Yeah, something like that, right?
I thought of that because in the graphic novel I told you, Mouse, the author drew Jews as rats and Nazis as cats. Okay. And you can see the metaphor right there. Yeah. And I thought of that, and I was talking with my dad, and I said, I have this idea. And he said, so what animals are you choosing? And I was like, I don't want it to be stereotypical. For example, Eloy Alfaro is from the coast, so if I draw him as a monkey, it would be like stereotypical, right? And I didn't want that. So I said, maybe I can choose some animal that is related more with our identity, with our culture. That's why I said, okay, I love llamas, and it's really related with the Andean culture and the context. So and also the graphic novel is focused in Quito, so maybe there was a relation there. And also the guinea pig is a very interesting animal for us because we eat it as we are very special. El cuy. Yeah, delicious, right? Yes. So I think maybe there's going to be a very funny way to involve those things in the narrative. So that's why I choose them. And
which are other options to learn and understand history? We're talking about graphic novels, but what are other options that you could tell us about?
As I said before, I love watching movies, like historical movies, so I hardly recommend them. But also, it's most of your interest, because I think history is present everywhere. For example, recently there's this new movie called Napoleon. That's from the history of Napoleon. I saw the film. It was really good, actually, but people are really critical about it, saying it's not historical correct. There's a great debate there, but I think actually if you watch, for example, cartoons, you can learn history too, because it's present not in the context itself, but for example, if you can think behind the film, like what's the message behind the film and what the filmmakers were thinking when they made the film. Like, even though the skin color of the characters can lead you to think some things, and can lead you to think, what's the message between or behind the representations? What's people trying to tell us? So yeah, you can ask that question.
In that context, I had some other question, or maybe a contra pregunta. Yeah, I don't know. In history, those representations, other options to have an historic perspective, it is a perspective.
Yeah.
It is sesgated.
Yeah.
By the people who made the movie, or who wrote the graphic novel, or the songwriter, the director. So is all the history sesgated?
It's a really hard question.
Yes,
but
yes.
I can say it's not like a definite yes, but as a teacher of mine says, in history, there's not objective perspective, because you can be objective. For example, I have a really strong relationship with the human rights history. So for me, it's really important in everything you write to try to have like this perspective of the human rights. But for example, it's my point of view. And I don't know if you heard that history is made by the winners.
Yes.
History is wrote by the winners.
Yes.
That's a fact. We can't fight that. So actually, the people who write history, it's also the group of power. The group that has the resources to do the investigation, that has the resources to do the research, and has the resources to publish. So we can wonder how much of our books are written by people who has this power in their hands and what they are trying to tell us, because history is a really powerful tool. If they told you that, for example, in the independence fights for Ecuador, there was just white men, what are you thinking of? What are your heroes? But what if I tell you that in the independence fights, there are also women, there are also indigenous people, there are also black people? You didn't know that because in the narrative, in the traditional narrative, there people wasn't open of that perspective.
We only commemorate like those heroes,
Exactly.
which history had put some value on.
Yes.
And yeah, it's like the upper class.
Yeah.
So
That's it.
that leads me to another question and next theme about history of subalternities. You tell me about this theme when I told you about this interview. So history of subalternities is a minority group, the protagonist.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about that? What are the advances made in that field?
Okay, I can see that people are trying to do more research about minority groups, and I think it's really moving on really good. But I think there's actually like a paternal sense in this, because, for example, you're saying, I'm going to give you the voice to talk in this narrative. So that's not right, actually, because indigenous people, Afro-descendants people were always there. They don't need you to see them. They just need you to acknowledge them. So there's the difference for me. I think because I did a research work where I found out that there was really strong presence of indigenous people from Cuenca fighting in the independence fights in Peru. Yeah, okay. So that was really interesting for me. And also this particular indigenous man, he was named Andres Lituma. He was asking for stop paying taxes because Simon Bolivar promised that, but he didn't make him avoid those taxes. So for me, it's like an opportunity to acknowledge those people and tell them you were present in history, you were there, you had a role there. So I'm acknowledging that. I'm not giving you the power to be there. I'm just letting you be there, if I can explain myself.
Yeah, you're explaining really good. And that is another issue. Is this acknowledgement real redemption for that people who's already dead, as you said? But is that real redemption or just a consolation prize?
Oh my God, that's a really interesting question. I think we actually can feel guilty of ourselves looking backwards, like saying, it's not my fault, but it's the fault of people who were behind me, like didn't let these people have their presence in history or their presence in society. So I think like it's not a consolation prize because you're trying to acknowledge people, like empower them and not just like trying to see them as vulnerable. If you try to make people vulnerable and saying, oh, poor you, here's your prize, it's fine, I think that's embarrassing. You don't have to do that. But if you say, I want to learn about your culture, I want you to teach me that, that's different. Because you're giving people the power to use their resources, their voices to teach you something. I think that's the difference. For example, I really like this thing in the United States about the Civil War, because it's basically promoted by the fight between black and white races in the US. And for example, movies were a really powerful tool to silence black people in the South. So I don't know if you heard of the movie Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, I heard of it, but I never seen it.
Yeah, that movie, it's really a historical lie because it tells you
Yes.
about how the South used to be so beautiful, how the South was used to be like this beautiful place where everyone was happy, but there was slavery. And there was the sir, the master, and the slave. So they are telling you, this is the past we miss. This is the past we want to go back to. So for me, that's a really powerful tool. So I think that if you want to do history in the US, for example, of the Civil War, you have like the white perspective and the black perspective. So that's a way to say there's a different opinion and a different way to tell history, but I'm trying to learn from those two perspectives to apply my perspective to and trying to learn as much as I can and discern it by myself.
So basically, you're telling us that there are some other perspectives that should be like you must pay attention to that also. Not only the winner's part, as we were talking before.
Yeah.
So I like your answers because it's all interconnected.
Yeah,
it's
that's
all
it.
interconnected. What are subalternity groups that you can mention, that you can like recognize in our society?
Well, as I said before, I think indigenous people, like they are a really invisible group, but because also we say indigenous people like a common group, like they are all the same. No, because we have lots of different identities, nationalities in our country, so we need to recognize them as individuals, not just as a collective group. Also, it's really interesting because I think the kids in our society are really a subaltern group, because people done made history of children, history of education also. And there you have, in our country was slavery too. We have slaves here and people didn't talk about it. Barely we can see research about slaves or slaves that are women. And also there's a really interesting intersectional component there, because you can talk about slaves, but you're talking about men slavery, not women slavery. That's different.
Okay.
And if you can talk about slavery, but what about the children? You are not talking about them. So I think the subalternity is also a thing that you need to pay attention to work it like in a really specific way and not trying to make them just a subaltern group and you are all the same. You need to pay attention to every particular thing that every person or group has and try to acknowledge them, to give them a specific voice. In this work that I did, I was working with the indigenous perspective. So it was really personal to me because I read an archive of the trial that this man sued the state to stop paying taxes. So I really connected with him by reading his words and said, I'm hurt. I don't have the money to keep paying these taxes. So I connected with him specifically, like seeing him as an individual, not just as a person who's dead and was part of a group, just as a person, connect with them in that way.
Each individual definitely has its own story, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Everyone has its own story.
Yes.
Yes, there are millions of stories that you could tell, that must be tell.
That's it.
Yes. So I want to puntualize on some group that you mentioned. And what is your opinion in the woman historical value? You know, this had changed in the latest years. But, you know, it's a historical deuda. Yeah, it's like something people must recognize more. And I'm going to give you an example.
Okay.
There is this recent investigation and recent like punctualization that was made in art world, where most of people told or was saying or was taught that Kandinsky was the inventor of like abstract paint.
Okay.
When it really was Hilma af Klint, which is a woman painter.
Yeah.
So, you know, because she was a woman, she was like just separated from the history. She was just forgotten.
Yeah.
And then Kandinsky passed to be the real inventor of that movement. So in the recent years, it's recently that is the recognition to Hilma af Klint.
Yeah.
So like for 50 years, 60 years, the inventor of abstract art was Kandinsky, not this woman. Yeah. But I want to hear your opinion on that.
Okay, for me, the role that women has played in history is really important, but sometimes we just think of them as maids, as homemaids, or just wives. But even though they were the wives of the heroes, they have a really important role in history. But as you said, it's a responsibility for our time, for our generation, to acknowledge them. And actually, I think there's a component of intersectionally, as I said before, in women's study also, because you can talk about these women and how they did something really important for our society, but were they educated in a rich family? They have this power. They have like this, possibility. I really like this example of Anne Frank, like the diary of Anne Frank, because you can see in the diary that she was from a wealthy family. Yes. Her father was the owner of a factory. Her father was the owner of a home, has a lot of employees working for him, even though they were victims of the Holocaust. And I really love the Anne Frank history. But she had the chance to survive 2 years in a hidden spot when most of the girls who didn't have that chance died immediately. So that's just something we need to really pay attention to. And for example, even in our country, we can talk about Tránsito Maguaña, Dolores Cacuango, these indigenous people that really fought for education, for women, for indigenous people, but they were really acknowledged in our society as the same way that we acknowledge Matilde Hidalgo de Procel, for example. Okay. She was the first woman to vote here in Ecuador, but she was part of a really, I don't know if I can say privileged group, but she has the chance to go to the university. Okay, when, for example, Tránsito Maguaña and Dolores Cacuango didn't even have the chance to learn Spanish.
The same applies to Anne Frank, right?
Yeah.
It's like a privileged group.
Yeah.
And that's what gives some support to these women to have a voice and to be part of history.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying that we don't have to acknowledge them. I really empower that. But also I'm saying that we need to recognize the difference between women. Because as I said before, we are women, but we are not the same. We have our particularities, we have our thoughts, we have our feelings. So you don't have to say women are all the same or women think the same or they did the same thing in every historical context. They really play a different role. That's really a part of their context, their background, and also their social position. That's really, I think, research that needs to be done based on the whole context of the women, not just the thinking or just the actions. Yeah, you need to know what is the background of there. Also, I have this example of Malala, this really powerful woman who fought for education in Pakistan during the Taliban government there, and she was almost killed. But we need to know that her father was a teacher. Her father was the founder of the school. So she has the chance to educate herself, to educate her thoughts and learn English too. She knew English and now she lives in England, and I think she's studying in Harvard. She also has a Nobel Prize. And I'm really proud of that. And I take her as an example for me. But we need to know that there are women in this world that doesn't have the same chance to make history as her, but we need to learn about them too, because they are teaching us some valuable lessons too.
All of this reflection that you made has another question that I prepared, and the ignore or to forget something in history is like the worst punishment that this field can make. Like, you tell us that the not recognition of important people, of people who made important things, is like something that we need to do from now to have that redemption on that people. But it's like forget history, the worst thing that happened.
Yeah, for me, that's it. I love this film, and actually I love this story of Argentina and the trials that they made with the dictators in the military dictatorship. It's called Argentina 1985. And at the end of the movie, they say, never forget and never again. So when something happens in our society and you forget, you tend to repeat the same thing. And if you don't pay attention to history and you tend to forget, you actually can make the same mistake again. And I think it's really common to hear that if you don't learn history, you're going to make the same mistake again. But I have a really good example of that. It's when Napoleon tried to invade Russia.
Okay.
He did it in winter. So it was really hard for him and he failed. He had the biggest fail. And Adolf Hitler did the same thing. He tried to invade Russia in winter. So what if Hitler tried to understand from a past lesson? Or also tried to learn that the ambitions of Napoleon also caused him failure? Maybe he could learn something interesting there too. But I really like the example of the Nazis because they also used the past and the history as a tool to try to pursue their interests. For example, they say that the German people were supermans and they were the superior race because of the historical past. They say us Germans are the founders of Europe, basically, which is not true. And if people try to learn more and read more, maybe we can avoid those thoughts of, I don't know, try to brainwash us and saying that we are something that we are not.
You know, that is a great example, and we call in communication that like an agenda setting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that theory is based on communication media,
Oh, yeah.
but it can apply to some groups of power. So, those groups of power set the agenda setting for the Germans, maybe, or for us, for all the people. So, yeah, don't believe all you read, all you see, because maybe they are lying to you. yeah. So, okay, that is something to punctualize. I'm gonna make a stop here. I think we have reached a lot of interesting points, but I want to refresh this a little bit. In which time of history would you like to live or to be? I don't know. And which time of history would you rather be on and why?
Okay. My favorite period of time is the 20th century. It's a really conflictive century. You have the 2 world wars happen there. But I really love learning about that period. And I know if I was born there, probably I would be in a lot of trouble, but I would love to be in that age, in that era, because there was a lot of changing happening. There was a lot of, I can say, critical moments in history, because you have the Holocaust, we have also the build of the United Nations. But I really wanted to be in that age because I think it was an age to learn a lot, to learn about mistakes.
And in which place?
Probably, I would really, really sound weird, but I would love to have lived in Poland.
In Poland?
Yeah, in that age, because...
First World War?
Second.
Second?
In the second.
Oh, yeah.
Because Polish people in that era really were fighters. They really tried to fight for their rights. But also it's really interesting because Poland people were really fighting against the Nazis, but Polish people really discriminate Jews and help the Holocaust to happen. So I would really like to see that happening. And I don't know if you saw the movie The Pianist.
Yes, I've seen it.
In that film, you can see where people from Poland tried to fight against the Nazis in their own ways, and the Russians didn't want to help them. And they tried to save save their country by themselves. So I think that's a really valuable lesson, like to try to unite, to fight for your right to exist and fight for your right to pursue what you think is fair. But also, I would love to live in that time to learn about how a place can be totally destroyed and raised again by their citizens. So yeah, I think that's a really important lesson.
That's really deep.
Yeah.
And for everyone who's watching us and listening us in Ukraine, you should learn something.
Yeah.
No, just a joke.
Yeah,
just a joke. All the hopes and good intentions to you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on a little bit. So, not only history, your field, social studies and social sciences are involved also in this. We have seen all the historical value and how history can teach us.
Yeah.
But that applied on society. Now we're having this massive globalization, internet, all of the interconnections. I can say that some people can maybe saw this in Ukraine. So
Yeah.
that's pretty big shit.
Yeah.
So globalization is a fact. It's creating a whole new generation of globalized people and civilization.
Yes.
But can this mean the loss and contempt of a particular culture? You know, if we have like a global culture, what about the internal things? What about maybe eating cuy? What about maybe having our own Christmas songs?
Yeah.
Yeah. So some things like that. How can globalization affect on this? And it is a good thing or a bad thing? What do you think? What do you think about it?
I think in the first place, globalization, it's a good thing because can help us communicate with the rest of the world and also have like a global sense of consciousness. As you said, for example, you were thinking in Ukraine. I'm thinking in Palestine right now, for example.
Okay,
yeah, we're more conscious about what's happening around us and also say, I'm living here, but in the other part of the world, things are happening, but I know what's happening in real time. So I think it's a privilege to have that access to information and also calls for critical thinking. Like if I know that there's a war in Ukraine, there's a war in Palestine, what can I do to understand in a very good way? I'm not saying you have to take sides. I'm just saying that you have to try to understand what's happening to make yourself like a global citizen. As you said, you have like a global culture and you need to get involved in that global structure to be a citizen with self-reflective thoughts and self-critical things. And critical thinking for me, it's the basis of this. But as you said, I think we cannot separate ourselves from our country and our born place. For example, I love the way I talk, even though I know Cuencanos talk in a very special way.
Yes.
And most of people make fun of us, but I really like it. For me, it's like a part of my personality. And for me, it's something that makes me myself. But for us, even though I'm talking about teachers, it's our responsibility in this time to make our students and young people to understand that you can be involved in the global structure that's perfectly fine and it's necessary, but you can forget who you are.
Okay.
And you can forget who are you coming from. Because if you forget that, it's easy for you to be an imposter and try to be someone who you are not. And for example, as Ecuadorians, if we travel to the US, we brought our cuy with us, our humitas with us, and that's part of our identity. And also we brought our way of speaking, our way of talking. So I think it's something we cannot separate from, but we need to acknowledge them and also empower that. Feel proud of who you are and feel proud of where you come from, even though it's some messy place, complicated place, you need to love it because it's the place that see you born. So I think that
is a great reflection.
Thank you.
Yeah. I totally empathize with that. You know, maybe we can have a global culture all around the globe, but you cannot ignore your roots. You cannot ignore the earth that saw you.
Yeah.
That put you here now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah. I really like that appreciation.
Thank you.
Let's move on a little bit on this, because maybe this global culture, it's also sesgated, as we said before, by these powerful groups. And this can lead to that agenda setting that I told you.
Yeah.
So also in reality construction, as you put some examples, maybe Second World War movies only show us the Nazis as the bad guys and the killers and everything, and USA savers, like heroes. So
that's right.
that is something that you should put attention on, and that is part of the global culture.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So again, everyone who sees this, don't accept everything you read, see, or even think.
Yeah.
Yes. The same thing we had before, right? The same scenario, but these are just like different ways to control and manipulate the population who's down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in a more subtle way, it is like, some years before, hundreds of years before, it was like slavery and those things that are not normal now.
Yeah.
But there are some other subtle ways they are applying on this to manipulate and to keep us down.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So in this context, these are much more effective ways that don't lead us to think.
Yes.
If you were like a slave, you can think I'm a fucking slave. But now we're like thinking that is the goal, that is the top of things that we can do. Also, we're making this podcast in English, so that can...
Yeah, they can give you some thinking. Yeah.
I was gonna say that, you should think that we're talking in English, not español. Y somos de Ecuador.
Yeah, so that's really interesting.
Cuidado con eso. Okay, I just wanted to say that, these are different ways to control people and to have that esa brecha.
Yeah, that separation.
Yeah, between the
social classes, even countries like the industrial ones, the poor ones. I think those, like, to try to put people an etiquette and said you are this and you need to do that. It's something that can stick in your mind and avoid you from doing some things. Like, for example, as I think maybe when we were kids, we grew up listening, you're in Ecuador, like in a poor country, not industrial country, so you need to or have a good job or move to another country to succeed in life. We've heard that before, but I think that's not true. I think we need to really understand that there's another kind of countries that really are more powerful than us and have these economic, political tools that can keep making them growing in power. But we are really a power country too, because we have natural resources, we have growing industry, but our problem is we have corruption. I know we have so much problems in our society, but if we as young people can find a way to help our country form our social background and for the thing that we study, what are we doing? Like, I mean, we are studying in a university in Ecuador, but if we don't make anything to help our country, I think we are just using our country for succeed in life and not taking our country in our succeed. Also,
that succeed idea, that wellness idea, it's all put by the American dream, maybe.
The powerful countries.
Yes, so that is another arista.
Yeah.
I have said a lot of words in Spanish too, but it's another thing that we should discuss later. We're running out of time, Angie. I'm gonna finish with this.
Yeah.
People who know me know I'm left-handed thinking, then I'm right. But the Marxist conception of the motor of history, the thing that keeps moving history and people forward, it's the class struggle, class conflict. As we said before, this gap between classes, countries, is like the motor of history. Do you agree with this or not?
I partially agree because I think that the social basis and the oppressed sector of population is really a part of what makes history. But if we try to be really critical and analyze in every possible way, it's not that simple. Because, for example, in the Second World War, it just started because of this recension and this feeling of losing in Germany. And then came this powerful voice-talking man who said, "I'm going to make you great again." And they pursued that because he was capable to move people with a feeling that they know, the lost feeling. And that doesn't happen with the basis of the population. I mean, poor people didn't follow Adolf Hitler. There was really powerful people. There was really like the top of the society who followed him and pursued him. But, for example, you have the Russia Revolution that's really moved by the basis, like the work people, the working people in factories. So I think it's not like a general rule, but it's really important to see that in every historical scenario. Like you cannot understand a historical time in a historical succession if you don't try to understand what people were thinking at the moment and the social basis were treated at the moment. So I think partially I agree with that, but I think there's sometimes when it's more complex than that.
Okay, nice finish to this program. I'm really glad of having you here.
Thank you.
This is the end of the program. So yeah, thanks for everyone who watched this video, this podcast. Thanks, Angie, for your time also.
Thank you.
And for your knowledge. It was really interesting, and I hope everyone who's watching this had a great day. Thank you.